an aircraft carrier has roughly 5,000 men and women on board, and they come from all walks of life, all religions, all ethnicities, all backgrounds, and they come together under a common mission and shared sacrifice, and come together as just this amazing team. What I had to do was figure out, how do I lead so that I get people's full engagement and enthusiasm in order to really perform at their very best.
How high would you say the trust level is in your team? Trust is, as we've heard many times before, the key to leadership success, not to mention it being essential for high performance. However, trust building and trust maintenance too often take a backseat to the profit motive or to the simple busyness of daily business. Today, we're going to be talking about building high trust teams for top performance. And I think I would be pretty hard pressed to find a more qualified guest on that subject than today's guest, Captain George Dom, US Navy, retired. And George founded the High Trust Leadership Network. He's obviously a former naval officer and aviator with a career that spans several leadership roles, including being a Top Gun instructor, flight leader of the Blue Angels, the US Navy air display team, combat strike leader, and then a division chief at the Pentagon as well. Today, he's the chief operating officer of an aviation company based in California, as well as being an author, speaker, and leadership consultant for Fortune 500 corporations. And George has kindly agreed to talk to us about his career experiences, the key lessons of leadership from those high-stress, high-performance environments, his 5 pillars of high-trust leadership, and, of course, being a former Top Gun instructor, we had to talk about the movies a bit as well. So I hope you'll stay with us. Loads to learn in this episode and a brilliant guest.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
George, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on Leading with Integrity. I'm sure you're going to have some really interesting and exciting stories to share with us today, so I'm really looking forward to getting into it.
Thank you, Dave. Great to be with you.
That's great to have you. And to kick us off, over to you, really, to introduce yourself, tell the listeners a bit about your career history, your background, what you get up to today, what gets you out of bed in the morning, apart from early appointments for podcasts, of course.
Well, I grew up in, for those that are familiar with the geography of the states, I grew up in the state of Pennsylvania outside of Pittsburgh. And I went to school in North Carolina under a scholarship that's provided by the Navy. And so when I graduated, I went off to flight school, and I served 26 years in the Navy, flying fighters off of aircraft carriers and occasionally doing stints in what I refer to as the 5-sided daycare center, the Pentagon in DC. And then after leaving active duty, I started a career in business aviation, and I'm currently COO of an aviation company on the Central Coast of California. And that allows me to continue to fly and get my fix. That's what gets me out of bed every day, is the opportunity a few days a month to go fly. And so life's good.
Did you always want to be a pilot from an early age, or was it the convenience of the college scholarship, or a bit of both?
I really wasn't one of the individuals that knew from a very early age that they wanted to be a pilot. Although, I think young people at some point are fascinated with the idea of flying. However, my father had served in the Navy in World War II commanded an amphibious ship during some of the amphibious landings in the Mediterranean and then out in the Pacific. And he wanted, he encouraged one of his sons I had 2 older brothers to have a military experience, because that that was quite a memorable thing for him that he looked back on with great satisfaction. And however, growing up during the Vietnam era, my two older brothers successfully avoided that, and I was the youngest, so ended up being the best decision of my life was to apply for a scholarship, and off I went. And then I got a chance to do a little flying in the summertime on active duty with the Navy, and then I got the bug and said, okay, this is something I'd like to do, and rest is history.
With your current business then, so a few days every now and then to keep you in the air, what do you do when you're not flying then? Right.
So, well, I'm the chief operating officer, so I try to make sure that everything we're doing is coordinated, and communications and processes and procedures are in place. Although I often refer to myself as a high-speed cheerleader. We have such a great company, and the culture is wonderful. So I end up spending a lot of my time just going around telling people what a great job they're doing.
Well, that's the best bit of leadership, though, isn't it? Is being able to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's reaping the rewards, isn't it? I guess at that point.
Yeah. And we'll probably touch on this later, but, somehow we do very well at hiring really great people. And so all you got to do is, resource them and give them whatever training is necessary, and then give them the benefit of your experience, but then just sort of get out of their way and let them do their job.
I'd love to talk a bit more about your career as a pilot in the Navy in particular, because I mean, everyone's heard these two words, I'm sure. Top Gun. We all heard them. We've all seen them put together on the big screen, no doubt.
Yeah.
But you were there for real. So you were a Top Gun instructor.
Yes.
How much did the movies get right, and how much did they get wrong?
We recognized early on they weren't going to be documentaries, right? So there's some amount of Hollywoodism in there, but some of the scenes, the first movie that I really liked were the opening scene on the flight deck of the carrier, because an aircraft carrier has roughly 5,000 men and women on board, and they come from all walks of life, all religions, all ethnicities, all backgrounds, and they come together under a common mission and shared sacrifice, and come together as just this amazing team. And the crew is actually very young. The average age on the ship is probably in the early 20s, right? 23, 24 is the average age. So it's a very young crew. And the flight deck of a carrier, when I saw those scenes, I thought, this is great, because now these young sailors, when they go home, they can point to that and tell their friends, this is what I do for a living, because it's very difficult to describe unless you actually see it. So that was a great scene in the first movie. And then I thought the dynamics of air-to-air dogfighting were captured pretty well in the movie. It's just, you're trying to keep track of 2, 3, 4 other airplanes, and you're swirling in the sky, and you're under high G and all of that. I thought that, and the scenes were flown by the Top Gun instructors. So it was, in that sense, there were some, when Tom Cruise is upside down, on top of the canopy of the other guy, that's not quite realistic, but the engagement scenes I thought were very good. And in the school, the curriculum is based on, there's a lot of ground school academic lessons, but then in the air, the students start out fighting 1 versus 1 against an instructor, and then 2 versus 2, and then gradually the scenarios become more complex using more players. And so the movie really captured well the intensity of the flying and how much the students are trying to defeat the instructors who are presenting a problem to them and various increasing difficulty. And if the students have a solid plan and they execute it with discipline, then they will at least survive it, if not win. But if they make a mistake or they don't have a good plan, then the instructors are going to have their day. And so the intensity of that I thought was pretty accurate. But there's no Top Gun trophy given for individual performance, because as you might imagine, the whole effort there is teamwork and working together in order to solve the problem and accomplish the mission. The second movie, Maverick, I also really liked. And the flying there was really very realistic, I thought. In the first movie, the idea was to have the instructors fly in the back seat of an F-14, and they would pretend like they were flying and make it look like they were piloting the airplane, even though they're riding in the back seat. But they found that they couldn't use the footage that they shot because the actors were falling asleep, or they were under high G, or they were getting sick or whatever. So they ended up constructing a F-14 cockpit replica in one of the hangars in LA, and they shot a lot of the scenes and then used CGI to do it. The second movie, though, by then, during that 20-some year interim, Tom Cruise became a very accomplished pilot. And as you saw in the Maverick movie, that's his P-51 that he's flying. And he owns a Honda jet, I think, also. And anyway, he insisted that the actors go through a familiarization phase. And so they went out and got some flight time and flew in, I think, these little extra 300s or something aerobatic to feel the G's and to be, maneuvering. And then they got some flights in the back of L-39. These are former Czechoslovakian trainers that are owned by a civilian jet team in the U.S. And so they got to experience what it's like in a tactical jet, pulling G's and maneuvering and so forth. So the scenes are actually flown by Top Gun instructors, but the actors are in the back seat of these 2-seat Super Hornets. And I thought the flying scenes reminded me very much of a lot of the training missions that we used to do in the Sierra Mountains out here in the West. Low level, working our way down the valleys, popping over ridge lines, and to get to a simulated target area and so forth. So I thought that was very good. Now, the experimental airplane that Tom flew to Mach 10 or whatever, I can't comment on how realistic that was. And certainly my friends who flew the Tomcat were very pleased with the scene at the end when the Tomcat beats up on a couple F-22s. That was stretching the truth a bit, but we never let the truth get in the way of a really good story. So
no, well, that's it. I mean, ejecting at Mach 10, I can't imagine that's not going to be survivable, I suspect. But yeah, as you say, you never get in the way of a good story.
That's right.
That opening scene of the first movie, I think in combination with the music as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's iconic, isn't it? It's one of those scenes that everyone knows.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And as you notice in that scene, all the different sailors on the flight deck, depending upon what their job is, they're wearing different colored jersey because it's just so noisy on the flight deck and so forth that it's important to be able to tell who is who and what their role is and so forth. And again, it's quite a dynamic place there with, we land airplanes in the daytime every 45 seconds. And at nighttime, we try to land an airplane every minute in a recovery. So it's pretty hectic, that's for sure.
Yeah, hectic is the right word. I mean, the other big thing, particularly with the first one, it's probably too early to tell with the second, isn't it? But it was, I think, one of the reasons why the Navy got so involved in it is they saw it accurately as quite a good recruiting tool. Yeah.
As you said, we're hoping that the second one is equally effective because, frankly, it's very challenging these days to recruit because, frankly, a lot of the young people don't qualify physically either because of, experimenting with drugs or they're not in physical shape or whatever. It's difficult. So hopefully this will spur a lot of interest for people to think about, hey, I'd like to try to do that.
So my follow-up question to that is, how many pilots that you've worked with over the years are pilots because they saw that film?
Yeah, quite a few. There is quite a few. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Could you put a percent on it, do you reckon? Maybe 80%?
I couldn't hazard a guess, but it was not uncommon for somebody to say, that's what they said, I never really thought about it. And then I saw Top Gun and I said, okay, I gotta try that. That looks pretty cool.
Well, we say a lot, don't we, about Hollywood and the kind of the trivialization almost of a lot of things. But I think it's quite a nice example, isn't it, of the power for good that these films can have. So,
yep, for sure.
Yeah. So the next thing to talk about, which we haven't mentioned yet, is your time with the Blue Angels. But any listeners who are my countrymen who probably won't have heard of the Blue Angels, it's like the Red Arrows, but the US Navy equivalent. I probably shouldn't say this, but far more capable aircraft.
Right, but the Red Arrows fly 9 jets together, and we fly 6. So they have the edge from us on that, and they're very impressive.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I'm not talking them down, but yeah, I mean the 2-seat trainer aircraft is not quite the same as the pretty capable combat aircraft. That's
right. Yeah. Well, and now that certainly 2 years ago, the Blue Angels transitioned into the Super Hornet. So it's a very similar show to what I flew in the Legacy Hornet, but the airplane's 30% bigger and noisier. So, and that's what the crowd really loves is speed and noise.
True. So how does one get into the Blue Angels, and was that harder than getting into Top Gun?
Well, for the wingmen, they have to have accumulated, they have to have logged 1,250 tactical jet flight hours and have to be carrier qualified. And then they apply for the team and get a recommendation from their commanding officer of whatever squadron they're in. And then it's almost like rushing a fraternity or a sorority in college. You go visit with the team and get to know them, and they get to know you. And then out of that process, they whittle the list down from, some number of applicants down to the final 6 or 8, and then select 2 or 3 for the next year. While both of them are very elite organizations that are very, very competitive to get into, I guess I would have to say, because Top Gun it's a larger organization, and it brings in new instructors in a larger number than the Blue Angels do for their wingmen. I'd have to say it's maybe a little easier to get in Top Gun, but those are both very choice assignments. And then for the leader of the Blue Angels, you have to have commanded a squadron, a carrier-based squadron, and then the Navy puts together a selection board that includes former flight leaders in order to select the new flight leader. So that's how I got on the team to be the flight leader, which interestingly enough, you don't come in as a wingman and then fleet up to become the leader. You come in as the leader. So I had significantly more flight time and experience than my wingman, but I didn't have any Blue Angel experience. And when you see the team fly, realize that it's a 2-year assignment. So 3 of the pilots in the demonstration are in their first year, and 3 of them are in their second year. So 50% turnover every year in the formation. So as I came in as the leader, Blue Angel number 2 on the right wing, it was Major Pat Cook, our Marine Corps representative on the team. He was in his second year, and it was his job to show me or help me understand, here's what you need to do in order to fly a Blue Angel demonstration. And so together we figured it out.
That is interesting. I wonder what the logic is behind not working your way up and coming straight in as the leader.
Well, I think, first of all, there's a significant gap From the time that as a young wingman, then there's a couple steps in your career before you would command a squadron. So there would be a break in that. And I think to some degree, because there's no lateral entry in the military, you have to move on to other things, right? And and I think also as the organization, you don't want somebody coming in to lead who takes the organization back to where it was 4 or 5, 6 years prior when they were on the team as a wingman. You want to keep moving the organization forward. And then it also just gives more people the opportunity to have the experience, which is incredible, as you might imagine.
Yeah, fair enough. And I guess the 2-year turnaround is probably a big factor as well. Does anyone get to do it more than once, or is it just that you get one go and that's it?
Typically one go, although there have been occasions because of somebody got injured or we had a mishap, which thankfully hasn't happened lately. But when you join the team, I mean, it's sort of an unspoken rule that you are now eligible when you leave the team. If something happens and they need to fill a spot, you're eligible to come back and do that for the good of the team. So that occasionally happens, but thankfully not very often.
That makes sense. Flying off carriers, I mean, fast jets generally, the Blue Angels as well in particular, this it's no real exaggeration, is it, to describe that as life and death stuff and potentially massive consequences.
Yep.
Now, most of our listeners, at least I hope most of our listeners, don't operate in that kind of environment under that kind of stress and pressure.
Right. So,
I mean, the lessons that you can take from that environment, what makes those relevant to anyone, even people who aren't in that sort of situation?
Yeah. Well, granted, there are significant differences between military and civilian organizations and companies, but I'd hope that your listeners would be open to the fact that there are many similarities also. I mean, we all face complex and unpredictable challenges. There's always a high degree of pressure, and oftentimes we have low margins that we're operating under. We've got to be able to attract and retain top talent and leverage diversity. There's always a lot of competition, lots of distractions, and we have to work together as a team in order to succeed. And the two reasons why I believe it's really relevant is that, first of all, whether you're military or civilian, the organizations are made up of people, and people are the same pretty much throughout. Although I did have somebody one time say to me, he said, how hard could it have been to be a leader in the military? You tell people what to do and they do it. Well, that may be how it comes across sometimes in the movies or TV shows or whatever, but it's far from that. I mean, of course, as the commanding officer, I had what we call the Uniform Code of Military Justice behind me, and I could force compliance up to a point, but that would give us such low performance that we wouldn't be able to really be successful. So, what I had to do was figure out, how do I lead so that I get people's full engagement and enthusiasm in order to really perform at their very best. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I'd say is that relevance is that the good thing about it, operating in extreme environments is that because the consequences are so severe, you can't compromise. You can't look away if there's an issue, and you have to figure out what's going to work and then execute on that. So while your listeners most likely don't operate in a life and death environment, these universal principles that come out of extreme environments are relevant regardless. And if you're willing to apply these, they will contribute very much to your success as well, even though you don't have to take it quite to the extreme that we did, just because it was so unforgiving.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, particularly that kind of the autocrat viewpoint, because I agree. I mean, I've heard that as well. The assumption is it's a lot easier when people don't have a choice whether they do as they're told or not. But the reality, as you say, it's not about whether they do it. It's about the performance and how well they do it, and whether they do it with a smile on their face and are happy to do the next thing and the next thing after that or not.
That's right.
And it's not actually that different, I think, not having done both. But so this is an ignorant assumption, perhaps, but it's not that different to an employment thing, is it? You've always, as a boss, got that fallback position of, well, if you don't do it, then you lose your job. I'm going to stop paying you. But I think the point is, if you have to rely on that threat, let's say, or the UCMJ, as you say, then you're not really leading at that point, are you? And it's not going to work for the long term.
That's right. And the results are not going to be anything. You may get to a relatively low level of success, but not to the level that you need. And, I found that some of the smartest, most nuanced thinkers I've ever come across in my life were fellow military personnel, officers, and so forth, as we're trying to deal with very complex problems, particularly when we are involved in various, operations in cultures that we're not necessarily familiar with initially, and how you figure out, how you're going to make that work requires a lot of. You can't live in black and white. There's a lot of gray, and you have to be able to figure out in the gray. And so I think that may be a perception that some people would find surprising.
I mean, we could talk a bit, couldn't we, about just the general level of complexity in modern life, how that's ramping up, like whatever your job or wherever you work. But it's I think nuance is the key these days, isn't it? That and context.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and change is a constant. There's no doubt, right?
Yeah, so that perhaps leads me into my next question, which is about it's teamwork and trust, really. So they're obviously going to be essential to success in a high performance and extreme environment like that. And again, there are lessons that read across, I'm sure, to any kind of team environment. So can you talk a bit about the 5 C's of trust and why they're important?
When I left active duty and I was working in the civilian world, and I would meet people and they would find out a little bit about my background, I was getting invitations to come speak to various companies and organizations and so forth. And, afterwards, I was a little bit dissatisfied because I felt like I was giving them, 26 years of leadership lessons in an hour, and I was a mile wide and an inch deep. Right. And a lot of it were things that people, the fundamentals of leadership you can pick up, a lot of different places. Right. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, I've been to hundreds of these keynote presentations, and the good ones are the ones that whenever I leave, I'm thinking differently than when I came in. So it caused me to start thinking about, okay, what was the one thing that I could focus on that was essential to our success, whether it was, on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, or, in a fighter squadron in combat, or Top Gun or the Blue Angels. What was the secret sauce, that made all the difference? And that's when I decided to focus on this idea of high trust, because looking back on it, we didn't really talk about it explicitly, but oh boy, it was very much there. People would ask me, how close do you guys really fly? When I was with the Blue Angels, right? And I would tell them that, hey, if I could roll down the window in my cockpit, I could literally reach out and touch. If my wingman could reach out and touch either my jet or the jet next to them. We were flying 2 feet apart or so at 300, 400, 500 miles an hour at very low altitude, doing 3-dimensional formation aerobatics, right? So I never forgot the 2 years that I was on the team, the tragic mishap that occurred with our Air Force, the U.S. Air Force team, the Thunderbirds, when they were doing a formation loop in training. And when you're flying that close to another jet, you're not looking around and enjoying the scenery. total concentration is on this hot piece of metal that's about 2 feet from your head. And sadly, on this day, when they were doing a loop, the leader didn't pull out, and they put 4 T-38 fighters into the desert floor in Nevada, killing all 4 pilots. So for me to be successful as the leader of the Blue Angels, I had to figure out, what do I have to do so that my wingmen would come to work every day and literally put their lives in my hands and mine with theirs, right? What would that take? And I didn't have it all figured out ahead of time, but we had 2 really great seasons, and we flew, 75 air shows at 35 different cities each year and throughout the year. And when I look back on that experience, I started to dig into it. Okay, what was it that allowed me to earn that level of trust? And that's when I came up with these 5 pillars, if you will, that all begin with C, so I can remember them. But for each one of them, there's a question that my team was asking about me. And depending upon the answer they discerned, they would make a judgment to what degree they trusted me. And I had to pay attention to all 5. If I dropped one out, then we were going to have a little bit of a setback. But if you pay attention to one, it reinforces the other 4. So you get this upward spiral of trust and confidence. And it's all based on the age-old axiom: in order to be trusted, you must be trustworthy. You have to earn this, because trust can't be expected. It can't be demanded. It can't be bought. It can't be coerced. It's a gift, and it's a gift that's given whenever you earn it. And, you pretty much have to earn it every single day. So the first one is character. And the question my team was asking about me every day was simply, do you walk your talk? Do you live our shared values? Do you live up to your promises, your commitments, your responsibilities? And then the second one was commitment. And my team was absolutely certain that I was going to show up every day and lead them when the sun was shining and the sky was blue and the air was smooth. But they knew that during the air show season, we were going to go into some storms, either literally or figuratively. And because that's the way life is, right? You're either in a storm now, or you just came out of a storm, or guess what? You're getting ready to go into the next storm. So what they wanted to know was, are you going to be with us when the going gets rough? When we have to take a punch? And not only are you going to be with us, but are you going to show up and bring your A game and be the best leader you can be to get us through the storm to the other side? Because if you're just going to show up and cast blame and take names and CYA, forget about it. We want you to show up and be the best leader you can be. And then the question becomes, where does that kind of commitment come from, right? And the short answer is, I believe it comes from a very deep, a very clear, and a very intense sense of purpose. In the military, we call it mission. When you know what mission you're on and why it's so important, that's what helps you get up whenever you've been knocked down or you face significant adversity. The third one is competence. And this is what we typically think about, particularly in a professional situation, when we are making a trust decision for whether it's hiring or promotion or job assignment or whatever. And certainly competence is absolutely critical, but I put it third for a reason, because I believe if you don't get the first 2, this doesn't matter so much, right? If somebody doesn't walk our talk or live our values or live up to their commitments, or they're not committed to us as well as to the mission, then, but if you can get the first 2, if you can get somebody who walks their talk and they are all in, and you hire them and they have a a good amount of experience and skill, you can teach them pretty much what you need to know. But anyway, so when we'd sit down at the briefing conference table for our daily pre-flight briefing, I could look around the room and I could see the third question in their eyes. And the question was, are you good enough to be our leader today? Are you better than you were yesterday, but not as good as you're going to be tomorrow? Because we don't want to stay here. We want to keep getting better and better and better. And we as a team aren't going to get better if you as the leader don't keep getting better. You see, I had learned quickly that I could have a good day and my team might have an average day. But like any leader, our team's not going to have a great day if I don't have a great day. And so the pressure was on me every day to show up and make sure. Now, some days are better than others, but I could never have a bad day. And that was a big part of the challenge, was how do I manage myself so that I never have a bad day? And we can talk about some of that if you want, but that was a big deal. And then the fourth one is the one I think most leaders in 2024 are missing or have let slide, because none of this is rocket science, right? Everything here, your listeners will have heard in one form or fashion, but to put it all together. But this next one is connection. And the question is, do they believe you understand them? Which is a different question than do I believe I understand them? Because what I believe is interesting, but not sufficient. What matters is what do they believe? And when they believe you get them, that you understand their challenges, you understand their concerns, you understand their goals, and that they know that when you're making a decision, you're taking them into account, then they'll join up and follow you anywhere. And I found that people don't need to get their way all the time, but they do need to be heard, and they do need to feel like their situation has been taken into account when you're making the decision. Because if they don't feel like you get them, then there's always hesitation, separation, and disengagement. And then the final one is communication. If connection is, do they believe I understand them? Communication is, do they understand me? Am I transmitting in a way that is understandable to them? Am I being clear, concise, and direct and consistent in my messaging so that they actually hear and understand the message I intended to send? Because unfortunately for leaders in communication problems, it's the presumption that it's occurred. People say, I sent the email. They get it. I gave the talk. They get it. I had the difficult conversation. He gets it. They don't get it, at least not right away. And too often the leader tires of transmitting before the audience has received the message. So we have to have a cadence of communication that is consistent and uses a variety of channels and make sure that it's in a format that the audience understands. And then we have to have a mechanism that confirms that the message we transmitted was the one that was received. And we have protocols for that in aviation in order to avoid misunderstandings, where when an air traffic controller gives me as a pilot some direction to fly a certain heading or to climb to a certain altitude, I'm going to read that direction back verbatim so that they know that I received the correct message and understand it, right? So we have to do better than that. So there's the 5 C's there. And I believe if there's a personnel issue, whether it's personally or professionally with somebody, your relationship just isn't what you'd want it to be, it's somewhere in those 5, if you peel it back and analyze them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to pick out there, but I think broadly there's some familiar themes there in just any description of effective leadership, isn't there? One thing I will pick up on, though, that you said about not being able to have a bad day. Any human will have a bad day sometimes. So what strategies did you employ to kind of minimize or avoid that entirely if you could?
Yeah. So, the goal was that when the canopies came down each day to go fly, that I was fully energized, in the moment, focused, and very positive in order to be able to perform at my best. And that's true whether you're flying or playing a sport or whatever you're doing, right? And so I think about it in terms of 4 dimensions of human energy. There's the physical dimension, the quantity of the energy, and all the things that go into physically being energized, right? So diet, exercise, sleep, all those things, right? Nutrition. And then there's the emotional quality of the energy, right? Is it positive or is it negative? And we had certain rituals that we would have in the squadron in order to maintain a positive level of energy. And some of that also is affected by the physical dimension, right? How much sleep you get. Are you eating right? Are you avoiding, a bunch of sugar that you end up crashing, that sort of thing. And then there's the mental focus of the energy, right? So avoiding distractions. And again, each element plays into the other, right? If something's bothering you emotionally, that affects your ability to concentrate. If you didn't get enough sleep, that affects it. But that's what you're looking for, is the focus of the energy. And then finally, there's the spiritual dimension, which isn't so much, it can be some sort of, religious faith or whatever, but it's really about purpose, about something bigger than yourself that you're dedicated to, that really brings the force of it, right? So flying with the Blue Angels, it was pretty easy to have a very clear awareness of my purpose, right? You see it in the eyes of the kids at the air shows and all of that. And then the other stuff I just had to manage. I mean, we worked out regularly. We tried to eat right, and we would schedule so that people had enough sleep. And then you had to make good decisions, because there's always opportunities to do things that sacrifice one or more of those. And you have to learn how to say no to some things in order to make sure that you're saying yes to the outcome you're looking for when you climb in the cockpit.
There's a good lesson there for any leader, just in that last bit alone, isn't there? Is being able to say no at the right time. Business owners as well.
Sure. Well, when I worked in the Pentagon, after leaving the Blue Angels, later on, before I left active duty, I was in the Pentagon, and I got there in December of 2001. So if you think way back to what went on in September 11th of 2001, and I checked in, and I was on the staff of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and I was the Middle East Division Chief. So we were doing strategic planning and so forth for regime change in Iraq, and trying to set the strategic conditions for success if it was decided that the operational plan was going to be executed, right? And but here's what happened is that I would show up at my desk at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and I would power my way through with a couple tall coffees from Starbucks. And then, if I had lunch, it would be, a sandwich and chips and maybe, I don't know, soda or something, right? And then about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, all the admirals and generals would come out of their meetings and so forth, and they'd want to know, okay, what went on today? And then they would give us guidance for the next day. And so on a good day, I was walking out of there at midnight or later, and I would do that 6 days a week, and then just sleep all day Sunday, and then go do it again, right? And I thought I was performing at my best, But the reality was I was really good until probably Wednesday. And then from Wednesday through Saturday, I was just trying to hang on. And if my boss gave me something to get done, I was going to get it done because that's what I do. I get stuff done. I deliver. But if he really wanted my best work, he better give it to me on Monday. Because if he gives it to me on Thursday, he's going to get a product, but it's not going to be my best work. And it's because I violated all the things that I just described. And I just really wasn't performing at my best. So how cool would it be if when you came to work, your boss was interested in how much sleep you got, or did you have a good breakfast, or hey, did you get to the gym today? And oh, by the way, I noticed you haven't taken any vacation in about 6 months. How about taking some time off? I mean, we have to realistically manage our people based on the human energy systems that they are. And,
I don't disagree with you, although those were certainly exceptional times.
Right.
Yeah. But the normal rules probably didn't apply, did they?
Well, when everything you're working on is on the front page of the New York Times, there's a sense that but look at all the people in various businesses in tech and so forth. Or how about my friends that are doctors, that when they go through medical school and they have to do these residencies where they are literally going 2 days or more without sleep. I mean, it's crazy. We have to adapt to something better, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And the doctor example is particularly telling, isn't it? Because when you think about the decisions that they have to make whilst sleep deprived, I mean, yeah, doesn't bear thinking about, really, does it?
No, I want to set my appointment in the morning shortly after when they're starting.
Or whenever the shift changes. Yeah,
that's right. Exactly.
So going back a bit then to the concept of teamwork, I guess, which is really just about collaboration between different individuals, isn't it? What would you say is the secret to successful collaboration?
Well, I don't think it's going to be any surprise to you that I'm going to go back to those 5 C's and trust. I mean, I think fundamentally you're going to collaborate with somebody most effectively when you really have a high trust relationship, right? So if you have shared values and you're operating, living up to whatever your responsibilities are in the collaboration, right? And that you're both committed to the outcome of the collaboration. That's important. And that what you bring to the collaboration is a high level of skill and experience, the competence. And then the connection that the other person that you're collaborating with feels like you understand who they are and what they're about, what their story is, and you respect them and understand them. And they feel understood. And then finally, that there's good communication. So no surprise, I think those 5 pillars apply directly to the ability to work in a team setting and collaborate.
That's more or less what I thought you were going to say.
When you have a hammer, every question sounds like a nail.
Well, no, but it fits though, so it's okay. Yeah, it's not the square peg in the round hole problem. It's fine. Yeah. What has been your own best experience of being led?
Let me think about that. I was really fortunate in that in my career, I've worked for some really excellent leaders, who set a great personal example and were very interested in my development and the development of the people that my teammates, and that we had a clear purpose and we were resourced so that we could accomplish the mission. But I think in general, I would say the best experience is whenever you are at a point where you have earned the trust of your boss, and then that boss grants you a high level of trust. And then it's just, and now you're given the autonomy to do your job as best as you can to solve problems and seize the initiative. And I could give you a bunch of examples that occurred to me, but that's when it was the most exhilarating, was when I was, I had a boss who helped me become the best that I could be at whatever role I was in. And I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I was always fortunate that the people I worked for never let me feel like a failure. They understood that, hey, mistakes are going to happen. And as long as it's not negligence and you're doing your very best to do the right thing, mistakes are going to happen. Let's learn from it. And then let's move on, and you'll be better because of it.
Well, it sounds like you were spoiled for choice then, and you couldn't pick one. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. I mean, I like that about, particularly in the context where you were working, which again might be quite surprising to people that leaders were taking that viewpoint. But I think it shows a real maturity and professionalism from a leader who kind of look at a mistake that way and not automatically put it in the failure box and then blame the person, but more about, what can we learn from it? What can we do differently next time?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think an organization that has zero tolerance is an organization that's going to be pretty brittle, and people are going to be walking on eggshells, and they're going to operate defensively, right? They're going to minimize risk so that nothing bad happens, so that their job isn't at risk or whatever the punishment might be. And therefore, the organization is going to operate at a much lower level than it otherwise could in productivity and innovation and so forth. But when people are given the opportunity to accept some risk, to lean in, and that mistakes are not viewed as failures, but simply part of the process, part of the way we do business. Now, comes with some, the leaders have to make sure that they set the guardrails correctly and that they monitor enough to make sure that there's nothing fatal happens. And by that, I mean, something that the company can't overcome. But inside of that, what's the old saying? If you're not failing often, then you're really not trying hard enough, right? You're not taking risks. You got to take risks if you're going to move the needle. So
definitely. I also find there's a certain irony as well in those organizations where failure and mistakes are punished. People become so afraid of failure, they end up making more mistakes than they might have.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes out of the insecurity of the leader, right? The leader's so afraid of that or insecure about their ability to handle mistakes that they just unacceptable. So too bad.
A difficult question for you now, I think. If you could start your career over again, is there anything that you would do differently?
Well, I was really lucky that things being at the right place at the right time and opportunities presenting themselves in terms of, what I was able to do and so forth. I don't think I would change much of that. But what I would do is, if I was able to go back to college, I would be a better student. I wasn't a very good student in college. And while I had a good time and I learned a lot, of course, a lot of that was learning about the social lessons, if you will. And I didn't quite appreciate the fact that there was so much there at the school and facilities and so forth that are all there just to help me learn. And I just didn't take advantage of it. So that's, if I could redo that, I would be a better student in college. And then the rest, there's things along the way that you might do a little differently. But man, I really had a great ride. So I can't say that I would do anything differently.
Makes me think that phrase, the old one about youth being wasted on the young.
Yeah.
I feel like college and university, that experience is wasted on the people who are just there to learn how to drink.
Yeah,
because I'm the same. I look back and I think, oh man, there was so much stuff there that I didn't take advantage of because it wasn't on my priorities. And yeah, I came out of it with a degree, and I probably wouldn't have been able to do some of the things in my career that I've done. But also, if I'd done it maybe 10 years later, I bet I would have got better grades. I bet I would have learned more. I bet I would have taken more advantage of all those facilities that are available.
Yep.
Hindsight's
helpful,
isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Leadership Heroes.
Well, George, last question for you. It's my favorite one. It's called Leadership Heroes. So if you had to pick one person, it could be anybody you like. They could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership. Who would that person be and why?
Wow. We are living in, I think you'll agree, we are living in amazing times right now, in every dimension of life. In fact, when I talk to groups about high trust leadership and teamwork, I say, man, this is a great opportunity, because I've never seen in my lifetime such low levels of trust across all dimensions of life, whether it's government, whether it's Wall Street, Main Street, whether it's, sports have their issues, religious institutions, just about everywhere, right? And so those people and organizations that are able to develop a high level of trustworthiness and trust, they're going to break out and so forth. And so I can't help but, thinking about where the U.S. is now politically and what we're currently and will continue to go through in this election year, 2024. And I'm not a scholar of Abraham Lincoln, but he would be the one I would pick as the one person that perfectly, at least in my understanding of his life and what he accomplished, embodies leadership. This guy, he had the vision to know where he wanted to take the country. He was facing just amazing challenges, both professionally and personally. He had some real tragedies in his personal life, losing a son and so forth. But he had the character and your podcaster, the integrity, to live the values. He leveraged diversity. There's a famous book, Team of Rivals, about how he brought into his cabinet members of the other party, of other political viewpoints. He connected with people. Certainly as the commander-in-chief, he would go visit the battlefields, and he would go to the hospitals to see the wounded and visit with the wounded, staying grounded at the impact of his decisions. And then he was such a master communicator. And every time I go to Washington, D.C., I try to carve out some time to go for a jog on the mall there. And I always end the run with a run up the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And then while I'm panting from being worn out, I take a few minutes to read the Gettysburg Address, and especially his second inaugural address, which was just magic. So that would be my choice.
It is a good choice, which is probably why we've had it a few times now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Quite a few people have chosen him. And I think, he's such an interesting figure from history, isn't he? He's one of those people, he's probably universally known and recognized even outside of his own country, which is quite rare for a national leader, I think. I think what really kind of appeals to me about him from a leadership perspective was, and this is a bit of a double-edged sword as well, actually, is he knew what the right thing to do was. And he knew it was going to be difficult. He knew it was going to punish him personally, definitely politically. But because it was the right thing to do, he did it anyway. And I think there's so much to learn just about that and the way that he did that in leadership. And side note, I'm actually watching the Apple TV series Manhunt at the moment, which is all about tangentially about him. Obviously, it's the hunt for John Wilkes Booth after the assassination.
Oh, okay.
It's really interesting. It's dramatized, obviously, but it's quite interesting. It's a bit of history that I didn't know much about, because nobody really tells the story about what happened immediately afterwards.
Right.
So yeah, it's quite. I'd recommend it. It's interesting. It's hard going at points, but it's interesting watching.
Yeah, I read a book about it years ago, and it would be fun to reconnect with that story. I just can't help but think to your comments about him, how easy it would have been for him to give up, to quit, to say, hey, it just can't get done, right? And, I look at our politicians right now. You're seeing a fair number of them in Congress that are resigning rather than, sticking around and doing and fixing the problem, right? They're just, giving it up to let somebody else deal with it. And it's just too bad to see.
Yeah, I mean, he could have even just sort of taken the half measure, gone for the compromise, and probably still been lauded for that and got a pat on the back, and probably could have slept at night. But well, maybe he couldn't. I don't know. Maybe that's why he didn't do that. But
yeah, I sort of I sort of categorize leaders into two different buckets, if you will. There's the status quo leader, who I've observed, who, gets handed a situation as a leader and just doesn't want to mess it up, just sort of maintain the stock price, don't cause any trouble. And then at the appropriate time, then they turn the organization over to somebody else. And then there's the transformational leader who has ideas about where he or she want to take the organization. They have an unwillingness to accept the status quo. We're not staying here. We are moving forward, and we are going to go to a new place that we haven't been before. And then they've invested in the relationships of the people that work for them, such that they have the influence to bring everybody along. Because everybody, whenever there's change, there's always is accompanied by anxiety and fear. And they overcome that anxiety and fear because they're trusted, because they have the influence to people go, well, I'm not really sure, but David's my guy. I'm coming with him, and let's go. That's certainly what he was, a transformational leader.
Hard to doubt that, isn't it? Definitely. Well, George, we're almost out of time. So all that's really left for me to say is thank you so much for your time today and for sharing all these stories and insights. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed myself. And the last small question I'll ask you, if any of the listeners want to know more about you, where can they go?
So if they go to my website, georgedahm.com, I've got lots of blog posts and videos and stuff there that they can dig a little deeper into what we talked about today, and that'd be great.
Awesome. I'll pop that link in the episode description as well so everyone can find that easily. Well, that's it. That's all we've got time for.
Take care, David. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You as well. Massive thanks again to George for his time and for sharing the benefits of his experience with us today. Listener, I hope you got plenty of value from that. Thank you for being with us today. And if you would like to learn more about George, then do check out the episode description for those links. I can recommend his blog. There's some great articles on there that I've thoroughly enjoyed reading myself. Join me again next week when I'll be talking to accredited career coach Camilla de Boer about her 14-year corporate background in urban planning, her experiences with stress and burnout at work, and then how she helps high-achieving women love their careers again. So until then, have an awesome week. Remember, follow George's 5 C's and build trust through character, commitment, competence, connection, and communication. And as always, be a leader, not a boss.